I think that at the deepest place of a man's heart is the question, do I have what it takes? And when you put yourself in a situation that's extremely adventurous, where you actually could die and you make it out on the other side, that's the answer to the question. For the first time in your life, you can say yes. For that particular situation, that particular adventure, I had what it took. And it may have taken the help of another man or the help of God, but somehow you survived it. This podcast explores stories of people who invest their lives to serve others. The topics and interviews in this show are intended to inspire all of us to live our best story so others can fully discover the kingdom effect.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Kingdom Effect. You're here with Glenn and Kevin. Tonight we're going to talk about what it means to be a man and the need for adventure and solitude and really getting away from distractions and just really listening to what God has to say to you. Kevin goes a lot further away than I do. I'm a big adventure seeker, but I usually stay in Tennessee. Kevin loves Alaska. So we're going to talk to Kevin tonight specifically about Alaska, his experiences there, and, kind of what's upcoming about Alaska. That's something I'm excited about.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to talk about it. Although, usually whenever you ask me questions about that, I kind of push back. I don't really know why. I kind of get not really nervous, but just kind of feels awkward to talk about it. Particularly my first couple of trips to Alaska, and particularly even my first trip to Alaska, because there's a lot of really personal stories in it. God blew us away the first time we went, and crazy things happened. And it's kind of like I'm almost hesitant to share some of the things. And there's probably been to Alaska 11 or 12 times. Every trip is a little bit different, but there's been several trips where just things happen that God just showed up and did really cool stuff. And I think that's kind of what makes me hesitant to talk about it.
Hey, before we get into, some specifics about Alaska, let's talk about why is adventure? Why is solitude? Why is brotherhood? Why is that so important for men?
Well, that's a great question. And I would have to answer that probably three different ways. One, because adventure is adrenaline. Your body's pumping out the adrenaline and dopamine, and it's really an amazing experience. But the solitude is the opposite. Solitude is your body dialing down and actually recovering. Both of those are extremely important. And I think either one of them, if you do too much of either one, then you're in an unhealthy place. You don't want to just constantly force your body to live on adrenaline and dopamine, but at the same time, you don't want to just, be a couch potato and let your life waste away. So I didn't even think about talking about this as we talked about what the episode would be like, but that's really a key, is that you learn how to balance those two. Typically where we are as American men, we just kind of ride the middle all the time. So we're not getting way out of our comfort zones. We're keeping our safety nets right under us, but we also don't really allow our body to dial down and recover at the same time. So we're just living in this boring middle ground all the time.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And I know for me, there's those guy trips where we're out hiking, doing some extreme stuff, nearly drowning, kayaking, crazy guy stuff. And then there's that time where we're just guys huddled around a campfire, sharing stories, kind of that chill time. And then there's times where you just go on a hike by yourself and just enjoy the silence. What do you gain from, adrenaline pumping activity and just sitting around the campfire? Do you prefer one over the other?
I think they're equally important and also equally as fulfilling for you. I think I'd have to start with my definition of adventure, and this is kind of my personal definition. You may disagree. All of you out there may disagree, but how I've come to define adventure is getting just outside the realm of your comfort zone, which forces you to depend on either another person, or ultimately why I think adventure is so important for men is it forces you to depend on God. Like the most adventurous, adrenaline pumping times of my life forced me to know that the only way out was, to depend on God. So it's so important for us to get beyond our human capabilities or our human comfort zones and actually experience life outside of the comfort zone. And that's why I think the time out with the guys where you're actually doing the crazy stuff is so important, because you're having to depend on other men, which is a huge, for you to be a man, you have to learn how to live in community. I think as God intended it, at least you have to learn how to live in community. And then the dialing it down and sitting around the campfire is so important for digging down deeper, and having deeper conversations. I think everyone out there that regularly practices sitting around a campfire with guys would agree. Like, you talk differently, you think differently, you engage in ways that you don't in any other place, which is cool that you're out by the campfire tonight. For those of you who are not watching on Facebook, Glenn's actually recording this beside his fire pit. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. Both are very important. And I wonder what does make us open up more around a campfire as men, because, opening up to one another and sharing feelings and discussing hard topics is not something that's easy for men to do in general, but it seems like it comes so easy, sitting around the campfire with a glass of bourbon and a cigar.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on why it comes easier that way?
The only thing I can really think of is for men, you feel less vulnerable, if you feel like you're not being looked at and noticed. And when everybody's kind of got their eyeballs on the fire and watching the fire do its thing, and you're usually in the dark, it's just it's just creates a more safe environment, I think.
One of the things that's most important to me about the, doing the crazy adrenaline stuff is the camaraderie that you build.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I are really good friends, but, we go months without seeing each other outside of, online doing the podcast. So, when we get together, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's getting reacquainted or re-getting to know each other, but it's just kind of rekindling that bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think, probably the bond you and I created, the strongest bond was on a camping trip.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of studies about African tribes that take their boys through rites of passage. And the principle with rites of passage is you put boys together and put them in a really dangerous environment. And when they come out on the other side, they formed something, community, bond, however you want to say it. The word for it is communitas, which is a layer deeper than just community. It's kind of like when you're on the front lines, and I never have been, but when you're on the front lines fighting together in a war, in the trenches together, and then you leave and you go home and you don't see, your co-soldiers, your fellows in arms for 40 years, and then you have a reunion, you all get back together. I've heard someone describe it like this: you're actually standing on opposite sides of the room, looking over, and your eyes meet, and no words are necessary. Like, you're just in your mind, you're like communicating with each other without even any words. And it's all based on the fact that you went through this life-threatening experience together and you survived. And I think, when we go out on adventure with other men, it's just a miniature version of that, right? They call it a liminal experience. And a liminal experience requires danger, risk, helping each other through a hard situation. It could be a hard emotional situation or a hard physical situation. That's why, like, you'll hear siblings after a parent dies and they have to go through the funeral and all that it takes to, sift through the parent's belongings and handle the estate. That a lot of times they have a different relationship with each other on the other side of that. Yeah. So sociology calls it a liminal experience or liminality. So I think the adventure is a micro version of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I can think of guys that, any guy that's I ever served with in the military or law enforcement really wouldn't even have to say that I served with them. They're just part of that brotherhood. I think of guys right now that I still keep in contact with that live in other states. One in particular that I was real close to in the military lives in Colorado. If he called me right now and said, "Hey, Buckley, I need you in Colorado," dude, I'm on the first plane. Like, no questions asked. I think it's just that, like you say, that bond you build over sharing these strenuous, life-threatening or adrenaline pumping or whatever experiences together. And I think it boils down to something we talked about before, this subculture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm drawn to these men. I have this bond with these men because we experience the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can talk about it, and I know he knows where I'm coming from. He understands what I'm talking about.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories of Alaska, we took, I don't know, and I haven't yet talked about what we did, but later, the second half of my Alaska experiences had to do with taking 6 to 8 guys at a time into the bush of Alaska, 200 miles from the closest street light. We're living off what we have on our back for, 6 or 7 days at a time. So we're, hunting these little, they call them stupid chickens. They're little spruce hens that run around in the woods, and you can literally walk up to them with a pistol and shoot them. And eat them, or catching salmon or lake trout or whatever. So that's kind of the setting. But we took this 50. He turned 50 while he was in the bush with us, and he was a mega church pastor. So had his act together. He led hundreds of people in his church. Just the typical, guy that's got his whole stuff together. And then we also took on that same trip this young 21-year-old guy with long red hair that was in dreads, and he just came out of alcohol rehab. So we had one guy rehabbing from alcohol and another guy that was the put together mega church pastor. And we're like, this is not going to work. Like, this is going to be really weird, because at the time, he's changed a lot now, but at the time, every other word out of Elliot's mouth was F this and F that. And then you got the straight laced mega church pastor on the same trip. Literally the very first day in, the guy that was older and super nervous about being there and didn't know if he had what it took to meet the physical challenge of the trip. 2/3 of the way toward our base camp, he couldn't carry his pack anymore. He just couldn't make it any farther. His ankles were giving out, his legs were giving out, and his back was hurting. And Elliot picked up his pack, and Elliot had his pack on the back and the megachurch pastor's pack on the front of him, carrying both 75-pound packs all the way to base camp. That immediately created a bond between those guys that became really, really strong over the next few days. And the megachurch pastor, when he got back home and was telling his congregation about the trip, called Elliot his angel in dreads. That's what he called him. So super cool. And they became like best buddies. And that's another thing about doing outdoor and adventure and sitting around the campfire together. It levels the playing ground. You can have a high level CEO of a major company right beside the guy coming out of drug and alcohol rehab or homeless or whatever. It levels that playing ground. Both of you are asking the same questions. Do I have what it takes to survive this? Both of you are helping each other together conquer whatever you're trying to conquer. Puts everybody on level ground, and you can really build really quick, good relationships with people you otherwise wouldn't even probably have been talking to. So it's a cool thing.
From a spiritual standpoint, the adventure and the challenge, and then also the times of solitude. So the hikes you take in the woods by yourself. What is the spiritual significance or benefits from engaging in those?
A lot of people ask us why we go to Alaska to do these things as opposed to, the Colorado Rockies or the Great Smoky Mountains. And there probably are some places that we don't know about where you can actually go and be dozens or hundreds of miles from civilization, and not have cell phone coverage and those types of things. But we just don't know where they are. And Alaska's so freaking beautiful that it just makes sense for us to go there. For me, the adventure side, especially in a place like Alaska, it makes you feel so small. Like if you really get yourself in a situation where you're not 100% sure that you're going to make it out alive, it makes you feel out of control and small. And I think that's what really creates a bond between you and God. Like we said earlier, I've got an 18-month at home or 19-month at home. And those babies at that age, they can hardly do anything for themselves, right? They have their mom or dad there feeding them and changing their diapers and, wiping poop off their butt. And they just have this childlike attachment, this attachment that lasts through their whole lives if they're parented well, if they have good parents. And I think that's how it works with God, is when you put yourself out there in a place where you're vulnerable and you don't have what it takes to get yourself out of those situations. It just causes an attachment to God that's pretty special. And then on the flip side, dialing it down and getting your body and your mind and your emotions to slow down creates space. We'll be climbing a mountain on one day or salmon fishing all day long, and the next morning wake up and just look out your tent and just see one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It just creates a space for God to say, I'm here. I remember the very, very first time that myself and two other guys, we actually drove. We were in college and we were getting together. We did it like a 15-day fast together that was kind of going alongside a church that I was going to was doing a 15-day fast. And so we also did it. There was 7 or 8 guys that were asking God about the rest of our life because we were early 20s. And in your early 20s, every single stressor of life is facing you. What are you going to do for a living? Who are you going to marry? How are you going to make enough money to support a family? And we were kind of in that stage, and we all got together for 15 straight nights and prayed. And then at the end, we would come together and talk about what we heard from the Lord. My best buddy since 3rd grade, Scott Hunter, who I've talked about before on the podcast, came out of his room and said, I think I'm supposed to go to Alaska this summer. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's great. And he said, and I think you're supposed to go with me, talking to all the guys in the room. I've told you this before, but I had no desire to go to Alaska. I'd never thought about it. I wasn't really an outdoorsman at the time. That kind of came later in life. But the Lord kind of convinced me that I was supposed to go with him. So we started out with 12 people in a borrowed church van, 15-passenger church van. Everybody, when they started telling their parents and trying to actually plan for it, they just started peeling off, right? It's like deciding they can't go, or the parents said they can't go. And so it ended up with 3 of us, me, Scott, and Keith, in an old Ford Bronco with well over 200,000 miles on it. And we had no idea what we were getting into, but we felt like we were supposed to do it. So yeah, we planned it, took off, took us probably 6 or 7 days to get there. We broke down twice on the way there. But I remember this one particular point where we hit the Canadian Rockies and we came up on, like, right on the border of Alaska and Canada. There's a mountain range called the Kluane mountain range. And one side you look over and there's like, 20,000 foot peak on this side of you, and the other side is just a lake that looks like an ocean that just goes on as far as you can see. I can remember this like it was yesterday. I thought, man, I've known God. I think I'd known God for about 6 or 7 years at that point. I said, I've known God. I had no idea there was a God big enough to carve this out, and create these wild animals. So it just radically like opened my eyes to something totally new and fresh and a different perspective of who God is. So all that to say that being out there in places where you're isolated and your surrounding is bigger than anything you've ever imagined makes you feel so small. And so that's another piece of I think, attaching you to God, especially for men.
Yeah, I think too, being somewhere that's out in the middle of nowhere where there's no distractions, there's no cell phones, there's no office call-in. This may sound strange in a way, but there's no kids hollering, daddy, daddy, daddy,
right.
Do this, do this. There's no wife asking you to take the trash out. You're just kind of distraction free.
Yeah.
It's like you've got all that between you and God on a daily basis, from a relationship standpoint. And when you can go out somewhere like that and strip all that away, it's like it just gives you easier access.
Yeah. That's the emotional, mental part. And then there's even the physiology behind it, like the chemical part. There's a very clear pattern when we take guys out for that long in a place like Alaska, where even one of the most shocking things to me was we never even saw a commercial airplane flying over us. You don't think about that. It just happens.
Yeah.
But when you don't see a commercial plane for 3 or 4 days, it just is striking. It's very, very clear pattern or rhythm where the first day is amazing. Like, you can't believe you're out there in this amazing place doing amazing things. And you're kind of all hyped up and your adrenaline is high and you're just on the top of the world. Day 2, we usually have a really hard hike on day 2, and you just start thinking, what the heck am I doing out here? And it's painful. You end the day thinking, man, that was not what I expected it to be. And day 3, you're just mad. You're just angry at the world. You want to go home. We had people by day 3 begging us to get a bush plane to come in there and pull us out because they just it wasn't what they bargained for. But there's something that happens on day 4, and for several years I wondered what it was, but I observed it and thought, man, why is that the case? But on day 4, guys wake up, usually maybe with tears in their eyes, and they're starting to think about things they hadn't thought about in years or ever, and starting to dream about things, that they've never dreamed about, and see things they've never seen with their eyeballs before. And it's like a veil drops. And I found out later it was actually that coming off that adrenaline high. So, of being on your phone all the time and feeling like you're Mr. Answer Man at work, you have all the answers and you feel like you're solving problems. Your body just is addicted to that. And so, yeah, that first 3 days, you're just coming off the adrenaline addiction. And day 4, it's like everything's dumped. And that's when you actually get to the real stuff.
That's good stuff, man. And you could really apply that cycle that you were talking about just to daily life.
Mm-hmm.
There's days where, man, you're on cloud 9, you're happy, things are going good, great things are happening. You roller coaster down to that bad day.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks and it's really hard, and you come home and you're exhausted and beat down, and wake up the next day and you're angry. And then, I can see that same pattern throughout all walks of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why. I mean, if it wasn't, if there's anybody in all of eternity, past and eternity future, that ought to be able to handle constant adrenaline and constant working and never dialing it down, it ought to be God, right? But even God took the 7th day. Who am I to say that I don't need a little time each week to dial it down, when even God, when he was doing, some of his most important work, had to take a break on the 7th day and rest.
You also plan a trip coming up this year, right? This summer?
Yeah, we probably have 3 trips coming up this summer. And I think I had been to Alaska several times. I took my wife up there for a month, and we worked on youth camps and just did a lot of really fun things on the road system. But in 2008, it was a year after my dad was killed in a car accident, and I kind of crashed emotionally. And I actually had a guy, you probably heard me talk about now he's kind of my boss at work, that founded Groove Life, Peter Goodwin. 1 week to the day before my dad's car accident, I met Peter, and I knew, I think he'd be okay with me telling the story, but he was broke. Like, he had gone through 2 bad house flips, and my dad's had a car accident, killed him. It wrecked me and rocked my world and almost messed up my marriage. Well, I almost messed up my marriage as a result. Julie was 8 months pregnant with our 3rd child. So the first 6 months of Daniel's life, I really was kind of absent. But a week before my dad's accident, I met Peter. Somehow, when my dad had an accident, Peter found a way to scrape up $1,000 and help with the funeral in the midst of all the pain and brokenness he was going through. And it just struck me as like, why would a guy, and how could this particular guy figure out how to scrape up $1,000 to help a buddy? And we just got really close over the weeks following my dad's funeral. We just realized one day we were sitting in the parking lot of a restaurant, I'll never forget it, a few weeks after that. And Peter started talking about his dream to start taking guys on adventure trips to Alaska into the bush. And that's when we realized we had Alaska in common. So the first few weeks of us being in a relationship, we didn't even connect the dots on that. So at that point, that's the year that we started taking men, usually 6 to 8 men at a time, about 200 miles from the closest street light off the road system. So that was the first time I was introduced to the Alaska off the road system, which is a whole different Alaska, as you can imagine. So yeah, when you're in the bush, 16-year-old boys don't have cars, they have airplanes. They start flying at 16, right. Long before they get a driver's license.
I watched that movie, Into the Wild.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah.
I've read the book and watched the movie. And of course, it ends tragically, but man, I mean, that's a good example of, the adventure, the solitude. He wrote some good stuff in his journal. Like, he had a lot of clarity while he was out there living in the school bus.
Yeah. They just pulled that bus out of the bush last week. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they left it out there forever because they had to pull it out with a helicopter, and they just let people go and kind of go as a rite of passage or whatever out to the bus. But it's gotten so dangerous now. Several other people have had some accidents out there, so they just pulled it out last week, which is weird.
Man, speaking of books, you wrote a book about your experiences in Alaska.
Yes, I did. And gosh, it's been like 8 years now. But I published a book, self-published a book in 2013 called What If, Why Not? Through the Doors of Adventure, about our first half of the book's about the first trip I was talking about with the 3 guys. And then the second half of the book is about our experiences since then, which are the taking 6 to 8 guys out on a semi-survival trip. So we are planning to take a couple of groups out this summer. We haven't been out in a few years. The last trip I took was actually with my 2 oldest kids. And we did 1 week of a mission trip and 1 week of just showing them Alaska, which is amazing. We didn't go to the bush. So we're excited to kind of get rolling again this year.
Yeah, I'm not a big reader, but I've read your book, and it's really good, by the way. I've tried my hand at writing before. I guess I'm pretty decent, but not self-publishing good, I guess. Definitely, if you're someone that's listening and you're interested in adventure and what that means to us from a spiritual standpoint, as well as, just being a man and what that means for us, check Kevin's book out. I don't have the link in front of me, but we will get it posted. Where you can just go to I think it's on Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can get it anywhere, but
it's
on Amazon.
And Kevin will even autograph it for you.
Absolutely, and it'll be worth absolutely nothing. So that's one of the things I'm kind of I hesitate to talk about sometimes. I'm not a good self-marketer, but I was thinking, I just want to leave these stories for my kids, like when I'm dead and gone, I want my kids and grandkids to be able to hear the stories. Because there was, like I said earlier, crazy things. I'll tell a story in a minute, just one of the crazy stories that happened. But that my goal in writing that was really just to leave the story behind as a legacy to the kids. And if someone else reads it, that's great. Which I've sold a couple hundred or 300, I don't know, 300 copies. But I really don't care if anyone reads it. It was more of a process of me getting it out of my mind and on paper for the kids. So it's cool.
Let me ask you a question, Kevin. I guess maybe one more deep question before you maybe close this out with your story you were just talking about. What is the adventure and the danger? What does that mean as a man spiritually? Like sometimes I feel like, especially in the Western church, that we've taken so much masculinity out of Christianity, and which in turn takes it out of the family and so forth and so on. Just in my mind and in my experience, to me, it's so important to get out there and just be a man, Not that women can't do the same things or anything like that, but, taking my stepson out and teaching him how to build a fire, with his bare hands, right, and how to build a trap and build a shelter and just experience manhood and masculinity. What are your thoughts on that from, I guess, more of a spiritual perspective?
Yeah. John Eldridge always says, boys and man's greatest question is, do I have what it takes? Right. Mm-hmm. And I can remember the first time that I realized that I don't have what it takes in some area of life was when I was in second and third grade. I played basketball. I actually tell this story in my book because it was so pivotal, and I had no idea what I was doing. My dad was a very aggressive. He was in the military, extremely aggressive. He got kicked out of 8th grade for punching his principal and never went back to school. So he literally punched his principal in the nose and got kicked out of school. So my dad was a hard man, but never, he wasn't a sports outdoors. He did nothing like that. And so I remember just at the age of, second, third grade, asking if I had what it takes. And I joined the basketball team and realized very quickly I didn't have what it takes. As a matter of fact, I remember the very first time I ran down the court, there was 3 seconds left. It was my team was 1 point ahead, and I ran down the court, I shot the ball, and I missed. And the whole auditorium stands up cheering, like my team's parents stands up cheering. And I was like, what the heck are they cheering? And I missed it. And I realized later I shot at the opponent's goal. So had I hit it, they would have won the game. So, and I just really struggled with insecurity and self-confidence issues. I quit basketball in 4th grade, and I just never really found a place, and I think that's part of why that first trip to Alaska was such a huge deal to me, is I was still asking the question, where in life do I have what it takes? That's really what I want to pass down to my boys, really all my kids, but particularly my boys, is this legacy of helping them realize that they have what it takes. And that's the adventure piece. And that's not necessarily spiritual, although I think it has a lot of spiritual principles kind of built into it. But I think that at the deepest place of a man's heart is the question, do I have what it takes? And when you put yourself in a situation that's extremely adventurous, where you actually could die and you make it out on the other side, that's the answer to the question. For the first time in your life, you can say yes. For that particular situation, that particular adventure, I had what it took. And it may have taken the help of another man or the help of God, but somehow you survived it. And that moment, that's, I think, my first trip to Alaska in 1996. That was the first time in my life I finished out that trip and said, I made it. I survived,
Mm.
And so that, yeah, there's spiritual principles embedded all into that. But, chapter verse, I don't know. I can't tell you chapter verse.
Yeah. And no, I get it. For me, it's always been the more challenging it was, the more I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Like I've got a buddy, and Kevin, you know him. Listeners, you probably don't, but his name's Marty. We've been best friends for, since we were born, practically. I love to go camping with Marty, from the brotherhood camaraderie conversations around the campfire. On the flip side, I don't like going camping with Marty because he only wants to go when it's warm and it's comfortable. I once hiked a fiery gizzard trail in the middle of tropical storm Nate, I think it was, that blew through while I'm hiking it, and I'm like, yes, I'm like Lieutenant Dan on the shrimp boat when the hurricane rolls in,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, it just, like you said, it lets me know that I have what it takes, and that no matter what life throws at me, I can always go back and go, man, I made it 14 miles on the hardest trail in Tennessee in the middle of a tropical storm. Bring on these, financial issues, bring
Mm-hmm.
on these issues at work,
Yeah.
bring on all this other stuff,
I remember once I got back I'd been on several trips, a couple of trips even to the bush, and came back home. And one day my buddy Scott, the one I've talked about even on this episode, called and said, hey man, you want to go kayaking together on this river close by the house? And I was like, yeah, man, let's go. And it was like a rental place, kind of like go and rent the kayak, and it's whatever, 10 miles or whatever. We hopped in the kayaks, and about lunchtime, I was just like laughing and cutting up and, talking about life and having fun. And he looked over and he said, what has gotten into you? I was like, what are you talking about? He said, you have no fear. You have zero fear. And I didn't realize he was real nervous about the, little rapids we were going through and flipping the kayak. And that's the first time I realized the massive shift from being fearful pre-adventure to just not having that kind of fear, just having overcome that deep fear that something was going to happen and we were going to die.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. You're whitewater kayaking, and you're like, if I die, that's part of whitewater kayaking.
Yeah.
Kind of, I know the risk. And then other aspects in life, something so minuscule, scary to death.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And I think for me, that's where I go back and recall all of the extreme things to kind of get me through those times when I have that self-doubt that maybe I'm not enough to handle this problem.
Yeah, there's also something really special about, I don't know that I ever was in danger of dying anytime in Alaska, but there were two particular times that I definitely felt like there was a chance I wouldn't make it back to my kids. I remember this one hike. We started up a mountain. Our goal was about 6 hours, and we started up the side of the mountain, and clouds dropped down below us, and we completely lost our bearings. We had no idea which way to get back to camp. And then on top of that, we thought there was a ridge that we could just hike across and then drop down beside our camp. But once we got up there, it was like a ridge and then a 1,000-foot drop and an 800-foot climb and a 1,200-foot drop and a 1,000-foot climb. It wasn't nearly as pretty as it looked from the ground. But yeah, we were on the top of this really flat plateau, and we could hear wolves. We heard a mama and a bunch of baby wolves. And I got terrified because I would rather run into pretty much anything else than a wolf with babies, right? And it started raining, and it was really, really fine mist, and it was extremely cold. And I remember this moment. I was second in line of about 5 guys. And I looked back at the 3 guys behind me, and the right side of their face was beet red, and the left side was like as white as a ghost. And I was terrified. I was like, we're about to die. And I was thinking, I will not see my children again. And like I went through emotionally and mentally over the next 20 or 30 minutes after that, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because like my whole value system was tweaked when I felt like there's a really good chance I might actually die. Plus we had no idea where we were. So as far as we knew, we were hiking off the wrong side of the mountain. It was just a very out of control situation. And Peter was guiding us, and he was also that was what was terrifying, was when my guide was lost.
Yeah.
Like if I'm lost, it's okay if I'm with a guide, but if my guide doesn't know where we're at, we could be in trouble.
Yeah,
especially with
that's never
the
a good
wolves.
thing.
So yeah, but I wouldn't trade that moment for anything on the planet because my whole value system changed. I fell more in love with my wife. I fell more in love with my kids, and fell more in love just with life in general. So yeah, that's some reasons why I think adventure is so important.
Yeah, that's one of those situations where running into the mama wolf and the cubs is, you just got to be able to run faster than
Yeah.
one dude in your group.
Right, yeah. My problem was I was probably the fattest guy on the team, so I was probably the slowest.
Oh man!
But
well, Kevin, anything else you want to share about your experiences in Alaska before we close this episode out?
Yeah, there's 100 stories. You can read most of them in my book. So I would really, not because it's the best book ever written, but just it's worth the read, I think. But this is not really an adventure story, but this is just a God story. We had a hard time getting to Alaska in '96, our first trip up, and we stayed on this youth camp, and there was a family that run the camp. And the family had a young boy that was about 16 years old, and he loved shoes. And is really weird because he had like a size 14 shoe. And his dream shoe, I think at the time, I'm not 100%, but this fits the story. His dream shoe at the time was, it's kind of when Air Jordans were out, pretty new. And, they cost $300 a pair. And that was his dream, is to have a pair of those. And we spent the week with him. We did a lot of cool. It wasn't super adventurous, or we weren't like risking our lives on that trip. We were just getting to know Alaska for the first time. So super special, and doing it with this young kid. And we just like fell in love with that kid, and he fell in love with us. And we took him with us when we went down. We went from Wasilla down to Seward to see what Seward was like. And halfway down, we stopped at this glacier, which is not much of a glacier anymore. Back then it was a full-blown glacier, but now it's just a little piece of ice in the water. But God, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a famous glacier right there on the Turnagain Arm going out of Anchorage. And man, we got out of the car, and I don't know what came over all 4 of us guys, but we just started running. It was freezing cold, raining, and like 40-mile-an-hour wind. And it just hit us where we were and what we were experiencing. And we just started dancing and yelling and screaming and running. And we came back together, and it was just one of the coolest times, I think, of any of our lives. Just a real transformational moment for all of us. And God just showed up. It was really just the Holy Spirit, I think, just showing up there with us. And so on our way back, we stopped at like you have to go, if you're in Anchorage, you have to go to the souvenir shop. So we went to the souvenir shop, and this kid had been saving up his money for a long, long time, like a year and a half, to get a pair of Air Jordans. And so we were shopping in the souvenir shop, and he had already told us about his dream to get these pair of shoes. And the guy that was with us is named Keith, which the funny story about Keith is he is the far opposite end of adventurous. Like, he should not have been with us, but he came and he wrestled through it. Keith, after that really cool experience, Keith found a picture of an eagle. He was always talking about eagles, and found this really cool piece of art that was an eagle. and it was about $150, which is about how much the kid had saved up. And the kid spent all of his money, like just kind of secretly without Keith knowing it. He purchased that piece of art for Keith to give to Keith and spent all of his money. And when we left a few days later, when we actually left the camp, he gave it to him as a gift. And it was the coolest, most special thing that we experienced that whole trip. And we experienced some amazing things that trip, but that this kid would, give up his shoe fund, this big dream that he had for his red size 14 Air Jordans. Like,
there's got to be like 3 pair in the world.
Yeah, right. So, and this story is one of those stories I'm uncomfortable to tell because it sounds so crazy at the end. But we got back home. It took us 4 days to get home, and we broke down a couple of days. We were so out of money that the camp we were staying at gave us a bunch of moose, elk, and caribou meat on ice in a cooler, and that's what we ate to get home. We would stop at campgrounds and sleep and fire it up and cook some moose or whatever. But we got back home, and Keith was telling this story to some friends about this kid that always wanted these size 14 red Air Jordans, but used his savings to get him a picture. And he told it kind of publicly in a public setting. And the next day, a guy called him who was a lawyer in town, an attorney, and he said, Keith didn't give as much information as size 14 red Air Jordans, but this guy called and said, I don't know what size shoes that kid wears or what he's looking for, but in this dumpster behind my attorney's office, I found a big pair of shoes. And Keith went and picked them up, and you can probably guess what they were. They were size 14 red Air Jordans. So
dang,
we got to send those back to that kid and reward him for giving away his savings. So those are the kinds of things when you step out in faith, get out of your comfort zone, commit to doing something that you don't even feel comfortable doing, but you do it because you know you're supposed to do it. Those are the kind of things that happen.
Yeah, and that's the very thing, the very reason we do this podcast is to, highlight and encourage those that have gone before us or are doing it right now, stepped out of their comfort zone, given up so many things to do what God has called them to do. And also to challenge our listeners, to ask God, what do you have for me? What purpose do you have for me to fulfill right now? Yeah, man, that's a great story. And I know there's many more. I use the term God moments. I think you might call it that too, throughout your book. And so, yeah, definitely if you're a listener, please check out Kevin's book. Matter of fact, maybe tomorrow night we can give one away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could do that. We'll get back on here tomorrow night and do our discussion about this episode. And so, yeah, tune in tomorrow night and we'll give away one of Kevin's books.
Yep. Which actually, when this podcast released on audio, will be tonight. So
that's right.
Tuesday. And if you listen to it later, then you just missed out. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for joining us so much. It's pretty rare that Kevin and I get to do one, just he and I, which is good for us. We get to kind of take a break and, just kind of hang out and have some more intimate conversations because Kevin and I know each other so well. But we're getting back on the track with our upcoming guests. So stay tuned for that. As always, like, share, and comment on any of the podcasts, whether it be on the podcast formats or on our Facebook Live. The more people we can reach, the more lives that can be changed and help the kingdom effect.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you want to help us out, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and hop on our Facebook group to find out more information about what we do and when we'll be live. Check out our recap of the current episode on Tuesday nights at 6:30. We'll see you next time on The Kingdom Effect.